Our next project is about the element of color. But what is color? If you had to describe color to someone who could not see, how would you describe it? Well, first, we're going to think about this in a scientific way. Has anyone seen what's in this first image, a prism? What happens in a prism? Well, white light comes down either from the sun or from a man-made source like a light. It goes into the prism, and then inside of the prism, the light is broken up into all of the visible spectrum. So the visible spectrum is also known as the electromagnetic spectrum. Light is a physical property consisting of waves of energy that are mostly invisible to our eyes. Light energy, or electromagnetic radiation, goes through the air as a series of waves. So if we're looking at the chart, you can see there's more to the electromagnetic spectrum than what we can actually see. There's visible radiation. Those are the normal colors we think of in the rainbow. But there's also infrared radiation and ultraviolet radiation. So there's more to that electromagnetic spectrum that we can even see. So as artists, when we think about color, we might think about it a little bit differently. These are the parts of the visible spectrum, right? Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and violet. We sometimes see them like this, but artists usually put them a little bit different. In a circle like this. This is called a color wheel. The first part of your next project, the color project, is going to be making a color wheel. And it's very important that you have 12 steps to this color wheel. So we have 12 that go all the way around. Why a wheel? What does the wheel help us with? Well, the wheel helps us to understand how to mix color. So every color on the color wheel is derived from white, but if we were trying to mix other colors from white paint, it would never work, right? So the color wheel is designed in a way that we can take what are called the primary colors and use them to mix the rest of the colors on the color wheel. So if we look, there are 3 different types of color on the color wheel. There are the primary colors, which are red, yellow, and blue. Then there are secondary colors, which are green, orange, and purple. And then there are the tertiary colors, which are all the in-betweens. So those are yellow-green, blue-green, blue-violet, red-violet, orange-red, and I think I got all of them there. But those are what you get when you mix a primary and a secondary color. So if we're looking at them on the color wheel, they're also placed in that order. When you go to start making the colors, it actually doesn't matter where you start each of the colors, but it matters that the primary colors are evenly spaced apart. So we have to start with red, and then you're going to skip 1, 2, 3 spaces, and then yellow, the other primary color, and then 1, 2, 3 spaces, and then blue, and then you'll skip 1, 2, 3 spaces. Next, what happens when we mix our primaries together, we get those secondary colors. So if we mix red, and yellow together, we get orange, and that's where it's placed at in the color wheel. When we mix yellow and blue together, we get green, and that's where it's placed on the color wheel. We mix blue and red together, we get violet, right? And that takes care of our secondary color placement. And then in between each of those is the tertiary colors. And the tertiary colors, if you were in a paint store, you might call them a totally different name, but for the purpose of the color wheel, they're always the primary and secondary color name mixed together. So if we mix red and violet, we get red violet, red and orange, red orange, yellow and orange, yellow orange, yellow and green, yellow green, green and blue, blue green, blue and violet, and blue violet. You can also see this is split up by warm and cool color. So warm being the colors of the sun, cool being the colors of the ocean or ice. So when we think about how we use colors in art, all those colors on the color wheel can be used to make any color that you see in the world. This is a piece by Pissarro palette with the landscape, and he's literally made this painting on an actual palette. And if you see, you can kind of see here at the top, here are his primary colors, blue, red, and yellow. And then he also has white. And from all those colors, he's made every color on that color palette. Notice there's no black involved. That's because if we mix those three primary colors together, blue, red, and yellow, we should actually be able to mix black, although if anybody's mixed color before, you know that's a difficult proposition. You're not actually mixing equal amounts of them. You kind of have to get a little more finesse in to mix your black. And then white, you can't mix to white. White has to stay pure on its own. So with those four colors, he's made all the colors that you see in the painting. So now we're going to go over some vocabulary terms. When we talk about color, color is sort of a general term. Hue is very specific. A hue is a specific color selection from the color wheel. So it's in its purest state. Hues may be primary, secondary, or tertiary colors. A tint is a hue, so all those pure colors on the color wheel, plus white. Now you can have various amounts of white to them. This is something you actually have to do on your color wheel. You're going to take each hue on your color wheel and add white to it. Now the key to this working, you could add any amount of white to each of those colors, but you want each of the colors to appear that they have the same amount of white in them. So here's the trick. Do you think you have to add the same amount of white to each of the colors to have them look like they have the same amount of white? No, that's the hard part. You're going to mix different amounts of white with each of the colors to have them visibly look like they have the same amount of white. So you'll have to add more white to, say, blue than you will to yellow to have them look like the same tint level or level of value. A shade is a hue with the addition of black. So the same thing will hold true. You're going to have each of those hues on the color wheel. You're going to add black to them. Now, will you add the same amount of black to each of those hues? No, you'll have to add varying amounts. You want them to look like they're the same value, so it'll appear that they have the same amount of black, but you're going to have to physically add different amounts of black to have them look the same. A tone is each of those hues with the addition of both black and white, so gray. So instead of adding just white or just black, you have to add gray. Now, when you're doing the color wheel, don't make the mistake of mixing your white with your color or hue and then mixing black with your color or hue. You'll end up with a tone instead of a tint or a shade. Saturation is the relative purity or intensity of a color. So saturation means, if you have a highly saturated color, it's very bright. If you have a low saturation, it's very dull. We can change the saturation of color by changing its purity. So there are ways to change the purity of a color. That's also known as intensity. You are also going to make a color intensity chart as part of this project. So the key to this working is that you're going to have 3 rows with 7 columns each. And in each row, on one side, you're going to have a primary. So yellow is the primary, purple is the secondary, and then you're going to mix to the middle. So I'm going to mix a primary color plus a secondary color. Now a secondary color is 2 primaries mixed, right? What do we need to mix a purple? Both red and blue, right? So what happens when you mix all those primary colors together? What should we get? Well, in theory, we should get black. In practice, you're probably going to end up with a brown color. Now, we're not going to mix all the way across to get to purple. You're going to mix to the middle. So I'm going to mix a little bit of purple with the yellow, a little bit at a time till I get to that middle brown. And then I'm going to mix a little bit of yellow with the purple from the other side and mix the middle till I get brown. That's the key to this working. So then you're going to have a yellow and a green. Those are the 2 complementary colors. And then a orange and a blue. So we're going to mix to the middle to get brown. So as we talked about, when we're thinking, what we're doing is what's called subtractive mixing. So as we mix the colors together, when we mix our primaries, we get our secondaries. When we mix all of those primaries together, if we're thinking about reflective light, we have no more color left once we mix all those primaries together. And in theory, we should get black, even though in reality, we get that sort of dull gray, brown color. What happens in projected light? This is called an additive process. Instead, we're projecting all those colors. When we project them, all the colors should mix to get white. But also different colors are made when we mix them. Red and green mix to create yellow. Red, green, and blue become the triad to mix white. This is the difference between additive color, where we're adding projective light together, and subtractive color, where we're adding reflective light together. We get 2 very different colors. Color wheels can also be used to help you design color palettes. So we're going to look at a few different color palettes, the first of which is a complementary color palette. In a complementary color palette, colors that are opposite each other on the color wheel, like we talked about in that intensity chart, are considered to be complementary colors. And when we think about complementary, we can't, usually complementary colors actually are a little bit jarring. When up against each other, they create a vibrant look and feel fully saturated. So they're complementing each other in that they make each other seem very bright. So this color scheme can be very jarring and bright and intense. So, an example of a complementary color is red and green, or blue and orange, or purple and yellow. Even all those in between colors like red, orange, and blue green are also complementary colors. A few examples of complementary color schemes. Analogous colors are another type of color scheme. In an analogous color scheme, you use colors that are right next to each other on the color wheel. They usually match really well, they create serene and comfortable designs. Analogous color schemes are often found in nature and appear harmonious and pleasing to the eye. For your final project, you will have to pick a color scheme. So think about this. You're going to think about how you can pick one of these color schemes to match your personality. So an example of an analogous color scheme would be yellow, green, green, blue, green. Let's look at a few examples of analogous color schemes. Next color scheme we're going to look at is a triadic color scheme. And a triadic color scheme uses colors that are evenly spaced around the color wheel. Triadic color harmonies tend to be quite vibrant. They can seem a little bit less saturated. They're also very balanced. So we already know a few examples of triadic color schemes. One is all the primary colors, so red, yellow, and blue, or the secondary colors, blue, orange, and green. You could even use the tertiary colors, red, violet, um, yellow, orange, or blue, green. So let's look at some examples of triadic color schemes. Monochromatic color scheme is another type, although you're not allowed to pick this one for your final project. But a monochromatic color scheme is where you use one hue that may be added to either white or black to affect the value and intensity. So it's blue plus its tints and shades. Let's look at some examples of monochromatic color schemes. Sometimes you want to use more colors than what's available. This is what's known as an open palette. An open palette uses many colors, tints, and shades to create its color palette. So something to think about, we're limiting ourselves within our project, but how we use these color palettes to create our designs are very important to the composition. So the next thing we want to think about is, what do colors mean? This is the other aspect of your project. So for the assignment, you'll need to pay attention to how you respond to certain colors. And ask yourself, what kind of personal associations do you make with colors? Are there any colors that mean something to you in particular? Do you prefer warm or cool colors? Are you drawn to certain colors for any particular reason? Why do you think this is? So let's look at some examples. So this is a typical grocery store aisle. What colors do you see that are common? Of course, we see a lot of reds and yellows and bright primary colors. Who do you think the audience is that these cereal companies are working towards? If you said kids, you're right. When you walk into that store, they're trying to catch the kids' attention. And when we're first born and we're children, we actually have less ability to perceive different colors. The first color that we see when we're born is just red, so you can only see red and black. And as we get older, we see a bigger and bigger variety of colors. So kids are attracted to those primary colors first, and secondary colors. So you can see how that's very eye-catching to those kids in that cereal aisle. What colors do you see here, and what kind of emotions do you think they are meant to present in, say, patients? So there was a color study done where they put different participants in different colored rooms, and they took their blood pressure. And they noted that the participants had lower blood pressure in rooms that were painted cool colors, specifically cool mint, green, and other sort of pastels of the cool colors. Do you think that's why you often see this color in hospital rooms? Those cool greens and blues tend to have a calming effect on our nerves. So that's why you often see these colors used in these particular situations. Although I will say, to me at this point, I think seeing these colors slightly raises my blood pressure. So we'll see if they have started to have a different effect. Red is often seen as very active and exciting. Warm colors often create stronger reactions. Red specifically is believed to stimulate mental and physical energies. So often we see it associated with emotions of strength, passion, speed, danger. Why do you think red is often has those associations? Well, there's two common reasons. The first one is which, red is associated with blood. So biologically, when we see blood, it's usually a very intense situation. It could be in battle, or it could be during childbirth. So it has associated with it very deep and active emotions. What about black and white? Black is often seen as sophisticated, seductive, elegant, while white is seen as clean, youthful, pure. You know, it's something that is very, do you think this is very specific just to Western culture? You said yes, you're right. This is something that sort of embedded within each of our, minds just because it's something we see common in culture. And this is something that we'll talk about too. Sometimes colors have specific associations with certain colors while others might have a totally different meaning in another culture. So, do you notice any colors in between these symbols? In graphic design, yellow is often supposed to be associated with quickness and speed, while red is supposed to stimulate appetite. And so one of those color studies was done again where they put participants in different colored rooms, and they did note that the participants ate more food more quickly in rooms that were painted red and yellow. Why do you think the fast food industry tends to encourage these colors? You guess so, right? They want people to come in, eat a lot of food, and then get out. What about these blue symbols or these blue icons, right? Blue is known to be the most common color in marketing. It's associated with feelings of trust, reliability, coolness, and belonging. Oftentimes we see these colors and it's meant to seem as sophisticated, right? So if you're going to buy a car, you want something that's reliable and trustworthy. How about Apple, right? This is Apple's their former logo on the left, which was the sort of rainbow color, was part of their theme at the time was think differently. Now we see they've went to this other Apple symbol, that sort of clean, crisp, simple silver logo. And at the time, they also went through a pricing difference. They upped the prices of their pieces so that it would seem more as a luxury item, hence the change to silver. So let's think about this personally, right? We're going to do a little sort of a color personality test. Now, this is not scientific at all, this is just for fun, but it will help you think about what colors you might want to use for your self portrait that is the final project. Diana Vandal has created what's called the colors of human traits. I want you to think about which color are you. So let's go through her human traits. The first is nurturer blue. So a nurturer blue is sensitive to the needs of others, sincere, expresses appreciation, cooperative, collaborative, creative, caring, team builder, and player, people person, engages others, artistic, inspirational, spiritual, inclusive, mediator, peacemaker, idealistic, intuitive, romantic, loyal, seeks unity and harmony, caretaker. Do you feel like you're a nurturer blue? The next is adventurous orange. Just do it, action oriented, quick witted, charming, spontaneous, playful, injects fun into work, lives in the here and now, risk taker, creative, enjoys diversity, variety, competition, multitasker, cheerful, energetic, bold, quick thinking and acting, takes charge, high visibility performer, accepts challenges, enjoys problem solving, negotiator, performs well under pressure, resilient. Do you feel like you're an adventurous orange? Then we have traditional gold, respects authority and rules, routines, policies, Alliant, faithful, dependable, prepared, efficient, remembers the traditions at work, values family, work comes before play, practical, systematic, orderly, identifies with groups, strives for a sense of security, thorough, sensible, conventional, proper, a right way to do everything, stick to itiveness, evaluates actions as right or wrong, stable, organized, punctual, hopeful. Do you feel like you're a traditional gold? Or visionary green, looks forward and sees the impact of actions taken now, explores all facets before deciding, checks for accuracy, careful planner, enlivened by work. Status quo buster, designer of change, inventive, systematic, logical, theoretical, self sufficient, not often in the mainstream, persistent, thorough, intellectual, inquisitive, impartial, improvement oriented. Do you feel like you're visionary green? Some of you might feel like you're some of those or parts of those, and you have to think, what would a visionary green look like? There's a lot of different greens, right? That's something for you to think about as you're coming up with your palette for your personality. What colors do you think match your overall personality? We mentioned before, we also think about what are some cultural associations with color. Colors mean different things within different cultures, right? If you're going to a funeral, in Western culture, you would wear black. In Chinese culture, you would wear white. The color of brides in Western culture is white, while many other cultures have very different colors, including very brightly colored brides to celebrate the situation. There's also a lot of different religious connotations to specific colors, so those greatly vary per which culture you're in. The next work we're going to look at is by Portia Munson, and Portia Munson has is her work is actually just collecting different products that have been made industrially, and she's very interested in how marketing believes that different colors are meant to represent different ideals. That's why they've chosen that color. So pink, often seen as being feminine, you can see the wide range of products that she's found made with these same colors. And if you really look closely, it is actually a little bit disturbing. Here's her Project Green. So often green is associated with things that are natural or healthy. Piled up together in the center, they have a very different effect. One more example of one of her pink projects here. Oftentimes, different colors are used within a certain family for different reasons. This is a piece by Peter Bruegel from 1562. And what colors has he used? He has a lot of warm colors here, right? Reds, oranges, yellows. And he's chosen them to represent something very specific. If you look closely over on that left-hand side, you will see eyes and a mouth. Try to point it out over here, right? So this is actually a representation of hell. So people sort of wandering through and going through their eternal damnation. This is a piece by Camille Rose Garcia. The end is near, so it has a very similar dark theme, but she's chosen to use a very different color scheme, one of cool colors. And she's interested in sort of the disenchantment of youth. Her paintings represent fairy tales, so there's sort of a childlike quality to it. And the blue is meant to represent the sort of wasteland that she sees having come from just the commercialization of childhood. Toshiki Murakami is also interested in childhood and the colors of childhood, but he uses them for a very different reason. He is an artist who came from Japan. He often talks about his work as being a part of it's called the little boy syndrome. So, little boy syndrome talks about what happened after World War II in Japan, the first bomb that was dropped in the world during war. Was Little Boy, right? The Little Boy was the name that they named the nuclear bomb. And you can imagine the effect that that had on Japanese culture. Afterwards, oftentimes artists described the United States as a big brother looking over them, little boy, and dictating aspects of their culture. From this little boy syndrome arose anime culture. So that they used cartoons and very childlike imagery to portray things that were very adult-like and complex. In Murakami's work, he embraces the spirit of anime, and he uses a lot of similar characters to them, and also embraces that palette of childhood. So all those pastels, the tints of primary, secondary colors, but they're used in sort of a horrific or adult way. So the next part of this, the first part of this project is creating those color wheels and intensity charts. The second part is that you are creating an anti-vanity self-portrait. So what you want to think about is you have to take 3 images of yourself, try to make them a little more closely cropped to the face. It'll make the final part of this project easier. And you are trying to create a portrait that is overly truthful or comfortable. You're trying to create sort of a different version of yourself. Oftentimes, especially now that we have selfies, we try to create an ideal version of ourselves. And you want to think about this being more truthful, less about vanity. Jenny Saville has done a lot of self-portraits. She is a contemporary painter. She's really interested in how we perceive our own identities, and she's also very interested in plastic surgery. So oftentimes the portraits that she paints are taken after someone has received plastic surgery. So in this attempt to make themselves beautiful, something very different happens. Right? She's exploring. She uses a lot of sort of complementary color schemes and paintbrush strokes to sort of show some of the turmoil that's going on within the figure. Frida Kahlo is also very well known for her self-portraits. Frida had a very tumultuous relationship with her husband, Diego Rivera. You can see him pictured there in the portrait on the right. So oftentimes she would portray how he was always on her mind. She also wore a lot of traditional Mexican clothing. This was a time that Mexico was going through sort of a tumultuous time where they were deciding on the future of their country, and she really was interested in embracing her own Mexican culture, not Western culture, but the individuality that Mexico had. So you can kind of see that in some of her attire and her self-portraits. She also often made very personal self-portraits. When she was a young adult, she was in a very bad bus accident and had to go through surgery multiple times. It's a reason she started painting. So oftentimes you see aspects of her own physical pain demonstrated in those self-portraits. Paul Gauguin, also a well-known artist that has done a lot of portraits. He too, if you hear about his past, he was not, um, let's just say, not someone you would look up to morally. Um, he went through his own personal turmoil. He left his wife and 5 children to go find himself in the South Pacific, where he took on a lot of, let's say, preteen um, mistresses. I'm not sure you can actually call them mistresses at that point. But so he has sort of a well documented sort of downward spiral. You can actually see it in a lot of his pictures. You can actually see that portrayed in some of his self portraits. He's got the image of Christ behind him, where he's sort of judging his own morality or, his own sins. And you can kind of see that in his face there as well, sort of that look with the eye that looks a little bit mischievous or tainted. We also have another example, which of Chuck Close. Chuck Close, this is actually something similar that we are going to do in our final project. He has done many portraits over the years, and I'll show you an example of one of his earlier pieces next. He originally made his work something like this. This is his self-portrait, where he did very super detailed self-portraits. He also was interested in capturing the details. He had a disability and you'll see that in actually one of the videos that go along with this project. He had difficulty memorizing people's faces, and he has a disability that did not allow him to remember what people look like. So oftentimes he would very much focus in on the face and the details of the face. And to do it, he used a gridding method, the same gridding method that we will use for this project. When taking the portrait too, you can think about cropping and scale. And I use this one as an example. When you're taking the picture, you want to think about taking a picture that has a full range of value. Oftentimes when you're using a flash, part of your face will get a little bit blown out. You can actually see that in this example, how the right-hand side of her face is very bright. The left-hand side of her face is very dark. And that you want to be able to have each part represented so that you have something actually to paint when you're looking at it. But it is also a stylistic choice, but thinking about that range of value that you can see within the face is going to be an important part of your decision, is what image you use for your final project. A good amount of detail is also going to be important. Think about if you have any visible clothing, you're going to have to paint that too. Also, the background will be a part of it, so what you choose to include in the background is very important. Oftentimes, people ask if they have to have their whole face in the image. You absolutely don't have to have your whole face. You could have part of your face, you could have a hand covering it, you could be very closely cropped. How you want to do it is totally up to you. And you're thinking about your portrait being portrayed through color. So these are a couple more examples of Chuck Close again. We are going to be using a method that is going to make your picture look a little more abstract through gridding. It's that idea of pointillism. So in a pointillist piece, all those little images come together to make a whole. We talked about this during the very first PowerPoint. but the color is optically mixed, so our eye sort of fits together the pieces and makes it whole again. That's what Chuck Close does with his images, and that's what we're going to do with our portrait. We're not going to stick to a traditional color palette for a portrait. You're going to choose your color palette based upon personality and emotions. So what you guys are going to do is to pick a photograph. You're going to take 3 images, thinking about that theme of anti-vanity, and upload those to the portrait part of this discussion post. And then we are going to create a self-portrait using first coating a thin color of paint. You'll pick one color just to sort of get it set up. We are going to grid our 6x6 photograph into half-inch squares. There's an example of this on within the assignment post. And then on your colored Bristol paper, you are going to create a corresponding grid of 1-inch squares. So it should be 12 by 12 inches. As you proceed through the piece, you are going to change colors in each adjacent square. The value should be consistent to the original portrait though. So each colored square will slightly change, but the value will stay consistent. You're also going to pick unconventional colors so that you are sort of changing the color, not true to the original image. And you need to keep true to the values as possible. Try to keep the value the same. So here's some student examples. So you're trying to pick a color scheme. This student had picked a triadic color scheme, so he chose a primary, and he seemed to have that left or very minimally used the yellow within his piece. Here's another triadic color scheme. And it's up to you. You can put all colors everywhere. You can have all the blues remain on the skin, the reds in the face. It's totally up to you as long as the colors change as you move around the piece. So you can think, you want to think about cropping in, having a big image. This project does take a little while to finish, so that's my one warning before you get started. And the goal is to mix as many colors as possible. You're trying to create a huge variety of colors as you go to get you comfortable with color mixing and creating all those different intensities, tints, shades, and tones.